Hello, this is Rob Christ, and I'd like to share with you how the Lord's Prayer and Psalm 23 fit together. It's been said that if you know the Lord's Prayer and you know Psalm 23 well, and if that's all you knew, then you would know almost everything you need to know about the character of God and how to pray. And I do believe that. And there's a lot of similarities between them. There's also a great way of showing how God works in our lives. And so what I'm going to do is go through both of them and line by line. And then I'll show you a way that these two very famous things that we all know by heart, that we have learned from we know the King James Version by heart, of certainly the Lord's Prayer, and many of us also know Psalm 23 this way. But seeing it in a different way, I think, can really enhance the way you see the character of God and to see how to pray. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen here, and then we'll go through these. Here we go. And what I will do is I'll show the King James Version that you're all very familiar with. Then I'll show Greek, and in the case of the Psalm 23, I'll show Hebrew, and then a word for word translation of both of those. And hopefully what you'll do is you'll see a little bit of a difference between what you have been saying all of your life and when you look a little bit deeper line by line. So I'll start off in Matthew 6, says, Jesus says, "In this manner pray ye." This is the King James Version. The reason why I wanted to start with this is because it immediately brings us into this familiarity. I translate the Greek as, "Therefore pray like this, y'all," because this word right here is actually a plural you. And again, that's kind of this sense like Jesus imploring us to pray like this. The next line, of course, this is where we usually start saying the Lord's Prayer, "Our Father who art in heaven." The most important word here is the fact that Father is used. It's Jesus in the chapters in which this is the first time we see the address as Father, and that Jesus wants to bring us into this family relationship with God. And that the Father is in the heavens. Now, it's very important because in a few lines, we're going to say, we're going to talk about Father who's in the heavens. Maybe we think of that as being far away, but really what we're doing is we're asking that God comes close to us. And you'll see that as we go through this. But like I said, the most important thing here is that Father is family. Hallowed be thy name. Now, of course, in this case, the most important word here is hagios thedo. That's how you say that word there. And we know it as being hallowed or holy or sanctified, but it's actually has a broader meaning than that. It can be just as simple as being honored. The word hagiography comes from this. Hagia Sophia, if you're familiar with that church in Turkey comes from this. And it really just means honored in the most basic sense. But the most important thing about this line is that it's an imperative. And rather than it just be this way, declarative, it's really actually more like, God, make your name be honored. It's a command to God the Father to make sure that people here on earth treat your name with respect and honor. When we go to the next line, thy kingdom come, this has moved to a subjunctive, and a subjunctive is a wish. It's something that is a possibility. It hasn't happened yet. So we in this case, we're saying, let your kingdom come, or I want your kingdom to come. God, we want you to come out of heaven. We want your kingdom here. We need you. There's definitely that sense of imploring. That imploring continues when we go back to a command for the next line, thy will be done, is actually make your will be done. And when you look at these three lines together, it's kind of like, God the Father, make your name be honored. I really wish your kingdom was here. Bring your kingdom here and make your will be done. And then when we close it as with this this section, as on earth as in heaven, it's really, I chose to translate it more as in heaven and on earth, because there is a link. The two come together. We've asked God to basically come out of the heavens, come to earth, make these things happen here on earth. So there's this urgency, there's this closeness, God with us. Then the prayer changes a little bit. Then we start asking God to bring things to us and to protect us. Give us this day our daily bread. The most important word in the whole prayer is this word epiousion. And that actually means something more like substantial or necessary. Now, it is translated as daily in the King James Version. I chose to translate it as give to us today our necessary bread. And the reason why I say necessary is very important. In the ancient world, the idea of having bread every day when there wasn't an abundance of food was life-giving. It's like manna. If the Israelites didn't have manna come to them every day, they would starve. Now, of course, they would get a double measure before the Sabbath, but they still needed to have that manna. And in the same way, the ancient people who didn't have the abundance of food, they worried about starving all the time in a way that we're not really familiar with. The idea of daily bread, give us what's necessary to live today. There is much more of a sense of urgency in this than what we typically say. Forgive us our debts. In this case, there's a little bit of a controversy because some denominations say debts, others say trespasses, and others say sins. And they're really similar. In fact, there's kind of a joke about this. Presbyterians, we like to say debts because Presbyterians traditionally have been people in authority and power. They were the bankers or the landlords. Whereas Baptists tended to be the tenants and the debtors. So they would say sins instead. But this word, philemata, has a sense of obligation and an obligation to be paid. So debts is actually a really good word here. And it has a sense more of remove our debts. It has a sense of financial forgiveness. So a little bit more of less about forgive us for maybe lapses in morality, which is what we would normally think. This is a little bit more like take away the obligations that we have to you, Lord. And you really get a sense of that in the next line, because as we forgive our debtors, the NRSV actually does a much better job of this than the King James, because the verb tense, the verb mood is actually aorist, which means it's kind of like a past tense. It's already been done. It's already happened. So as we have already removed from our debtors. So this is a little different than what most people have been thinking, is that it's not so much that God forgives us and therefore we should then forgive the people that we have debts or have debts to us. It's more like a bargain. We have already removed the debts and the obligations to those that are in debt to us. Therefore, we ask you to keep up your end of the bargain, God. Please also remove that from us. And why this is so important really gets shown in the next line. Again, the ancient people were very afraid of debt. And lead us not into temptation. The word here, this word perasman, uh, actually means a little bit more like a trial or a testing than necessarily a temptation. And the way that fits in with this idea of a financial forgiveness is that in ancient minds, that the people that Jesus was speaking to, the idea of going into debt and getting dragged into debtor's court was very frightening, because if you could lose your freedom, you could become a slave, you could die as a slave, and it's there's a sense of urgency there. So God, please take the debts away from us so that we won't become slaves, or we won't become obligated to others. That could really ruin our lives. That there's a sense of urgency that we really don't feel as much today with all the protections that we have. But deliver us from evil. This is kind of more of a sense of rescue again, but rescue us from that which is evil. So, of course, it could be the evil one, it could be like Satan, or it could be from evil people or evil systems or things like that. But if you keep it in the same tone as these other things, keep us from falling back into those debts. Protect us, God, from those things. Very, very practical, very urgent, very intimate, that we want to, that we need these things from God. The final line, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. This does not occur in the Greek text. There are Greek texts that show this, but that's because it was added by Protestants much, much later. It wasn't really in the Gospel of Mark or in the Gospel of Luke, where we see the other version of this, of the Lord's Prayer. And the reason for this is for a specific theological reason. In the Catholic Church and in the Orthodox Church, the priest says this. Says, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. And after the people say the Lord's Prayer. But in the Reformation, the Protestants said, we don't need a priest anymore. We're the priesthood of believers. Therefore, we will say what the priest says ourselves. And that's fine. This is called the doxology, actually, which means an honoring of God. The problem with it in this prayer is it's very much out of tone. It's not, doesn't have the urgent or the intimacy of God being next to us. It doesn't have the urgency of the prayer, and instead we've stuck God back into a throne, sent him back to heaven, and do a bunch of honorifics toward him. And that's fine, and we can say that, but it's just important as you say this prayer is to recognize that this last line is there for a very good theological reason, but it's not really part of the Lord's Prayer. The last thing I'll say about this, one thing that the Greeks tried to do is the Greeks always tried to put God on Mount Olympus, always tried to look up to God. And the Pharisees, who Jesus was also speaking to, were trying to say, well, we know about God and you don't. We have special knowledge. And this prayer blows that apart. What Jesus' purpose is here is to say, no, God is neither on top of Mount Olympus as some kind of Zeus, this faraway God. No, God's intimate, close, my Father, our Father. And at the same time, this is a very practical prayer for regular people who need regular things to just survive. And that kind of intimacy is there. So don't let this last sentence, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever, throw you off and make this very close, intimate prayer into something that's distant. So what I'll do now is I'll switch over to to Psalm 23, and we'll look at this in a similar way. And then what I hope is that as we go through it, you'll start seeing, wow, there's some similarities in the way that this is done. Actually, the Lord's Prayer, Jesus probably knew the Psalms by heart. He certainly knew the Torah by heart, because rabbis do this. They recite and they know these things very, very intimately. And the Lord's Prayer kind of has that feeling of a psalm in the way that it's constructed, in the way that it addresses God. There's some differences in it being a first person singular in the case of the Psalms, and first person plural, meaning our or we in the Lord's Prayer. But other than that, it has a very similar feel. You'll see what I mean here. So the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And the strict, or the only real difference in it that I would say is that I will lack nothing. So I may still want, but that I have everything I need, and that the Lord is my shepherd. And the imagery here is important, because think of the shepherd as knowing every sheep. The shepherd is the guider of the sheep, walking through the hills of Judea at the time, taking the sheep to water and forage. And this imagery of that intimacy again, that the Lord is not some king. No, the Lord is a lowly shepherd and guiding me. And in this case, it's David that's being guided. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. The verb here is actually, there are two things here. One is this word deshe. Deshe means fresh grass, or the first sprouts of grass. And in Israel, after a rain, the first sprouts of grass are a sign of relief, because this is the desert, and the sheep are looking for food. The other thing is there's this word called yarbetzeni, and this is a verb that means more than just to lie down. It does have that sense of makes or causes to lie down, but actually it's a verb that is only used for animals. People don't lie down with this kind of a word. This word is sprawling. This means to have your belly on the ground, and like a sheep would, or like an animal would. So the imagery here is to sprawl out on fresh grass, and then to be led by calm waters. Now we look at that as, well, the waters are still, but actually it's actually waters of calm, and has more of a sense of, the waters could be running, but more of a sense that the waters give refreshment and life. And so rolling in fresh grass beside waters, being restored by those waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Again, it's more like that word for soul is actually more like life. He saves my life. I was starving. I was thirsty, dying of thirst, and the Lord, my shepherd, has led me to fresh grass and to water, and he guides me on the right paths on the account of his name. And this is really amazing, because it's not only that somehow God causes righteousness in us. Well, that's fine, but really it's more like God showed the right way to get to this new life, to get to this fresh grass and calm and waters of calming. And he does it for a really specific purpose. It's kind of like a deal again, a little bit like we talked about before. He does it because he wants a good name. He wants the people The shepherd wants the people to, and the other sheep, to honor his name. And he does it for the purpose of that. They, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. There's a couple of differences here I'd like to point out too that make a little bit different. It's not so much that the valley is a valley of death, it's more that these are ravines, and these are places that David as a shepherd was hiding. And he was hiding from the wrath of King Saul, and he was hiding from the Philistines as well. So every turn and every ravine around in the hills of Judea was dangerous. So even as he was walking through these paths, he knew that the shepherd, God, would support him, just like David as a shepherd would support his sheep. I would fear no evil. In this case, the word can be translated as danger. So I can go through these deep, dark valleys. I can be surrounded by danger, but I will not fear the danger because the Lord is my shepherd. Because you are with me. This is the center of the whole psalm. Because you are with me. Your club and your shepherd hook bring me comfort. And I chose these words because this word, it's called shivtecha, is your club. This could be, is really a matter of protection, because a sheep, there are actually old drawings, like hieroglyphic drawings of sheep, and they would have a club hanging from their waist, and they would have a staff, which is just basically a stick. The purpose of the club was to beat off predators from the sheep, was to protect the sheep, and that the purpose of the staff was to guide the sheep. It's like a shepherd's crook. This is a little bit different imagery than we typically think, because we typically think of the club being kind of like disciplining toward us, or we think of the shepherd crook being like the law. And it does have those connotations, but instead of it being something threatening, it's more about protection. Because the shepherd brings us protection and brings us comfort. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runs over. And the great thing here is the pastor Eugene Peterson, the author, was an expert in Hebrew. And in his translation in the Message, he gets the tone a little bit better than the King James. He talks about a 7-course feast. So I chose to translate it as a lavish meal. So even in spite of my enemies, the fact that I'm surrounded, David was surrounded by many threats, from King Saul and from the Philistine. Even though he was surrounded all those, the Lord sets a lavish feast to celebrate him. The shepherd celebrates his sheep. You honor me with oil on my head. That's what you do to an honored guest. So here we have an image of God honoring his people. It's not so much that we serve God as God serving us. My wine cup is always full, just like an honored guest. God provides for us not just what we need to live, but lavishly. He celebrates us. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is also a very good word. Surely, surely goodness is a very good translation. I would like to say, instead of mercy, it's a little bit more, this word chesed has more of a sense of steadfast love, loyalty that goes both ways, loyalty to God, but also God's loyal love for us. Again, this sort of intimacy. and I will stay in the Lord's house, the Father's house. I'm part of the Father's family for all the days of my life. And hopefully what you see in these is that there is, again, there's a sense of oneness and empathy and intimacy in the Psalm 23 that a lot of times when we say it in the King James Version, we really don't get. And you can see that both of these passages have that sense of closeness. So what I decided to do, it was suggested, well, why not take these and kind of put them together? So what I did is I tried to make it so that it could be a prayer that you can combine, and maybe it would be, the imagery would fit together. So this is my attempt at doing that. Our Father, you are in the heavens. You are my shepherd, so I lack nothing. Make your name be holy while you let me rest in the grass. Let your kingdom come while you lead me to restful waters which bring me life. Make your will be done while you guide me in the right ways on earth as like it is in heaven, for the sake of your good name. Give me bread, give me the bread I need every day, even as I walk through the darkest valley, and forgive me my sins, for I fear no danger because you are with me. While I have forgiven the sins of others too, your rod and your staff protect me. So don't bring me into a time of trial. Instead, you set a table for me in front of my enemies, so you will rescue me from evil. You bathe my head in oil until my cup overflows. Because your kingdom and might and your goodness and faithful love and your glory follow me all the days of my life forever and ever, as I live in the house of the Lord. Amen. Now, this is my version of just throwing these together. But what I really encourage you to do, because one of the most common things that pastors get asked by people, how do I pray? How do I bring myself to God and experience God in prayer? And these two passages do that in such a beautiful way. Take these words and make them your own. Take them, put them in words that make sense to you. And when you pull these together, hopefully what you can do is find a new, intimate, holy way to pray to God. And with this, I ask for blessings from God. Amen.